The Business in Wales podcast, sponsored by Sinclair Group, the business media for Wales. Hello and welcome back to the Business in Wales podcast with me, Daniel Bevan. Now, Benjamin Franklin once said that an investment in knowledge pays the best interest, but with budgets being as tight as they are, you'd be forgiven for business leaders actually taking a step back when it comes to investing in the next generation. But on the flip side, 17% of young people in Wales, aged 16 to 24, are NEET. That means not in education, employment or training. So one of those things has got to give. To talk about that and so much more is Rhys Morris. Thank you very much, from the Busy Group. Now, I want to get your title right. Managing Director in the UK and Europe. I think that's the first time we've had someone whose job title has a geographic location in it on the podcast.
It sometimes feels a bit grandiose. We're in the UK at the moment, but I think the Europe piece talks a bit to our ambition around where we're going to go from this point. I think the NEET problem is a Europe-wide problem, and so we've certainly got a view to growing beyond the UK at some point.
Well, it's going to be a fascinating conversation, that's for sure. Let's start off, though, with the basics. For those who are unaware, tell us a bit about the Busy Group.
So BUSY is an acronym. It stands for Backing Unemployed Southport Youth. Southport is a town at the top end of Surfers Paradise, about 40 miles south of Brisbane in Australia, in Queensland. And formed in 1977 by an inspirational bloke called Martin Punch, who was a local solicitor. And on his walk, I'm sure you'll imagine this, sort of lovely beach by the side and all of those sorts of things and palm trees, etc. But on his walk to work every morning, he would walk past the surf club and he noticed there was a group of young people just gathering there every day. And when he inquired, he realised that they're unemployed. And he decided that he wanted to form a charity that would help the unemployed young people in Southport to try and find work. And so he built an organisation using grant-funded money from the Queensland government to start running programs to help young people into work. And now, nearly 50 years later, you have an organisation in Australia which runs skills programs, runs employability programs. So think helping long-term unemployed people to re-engage with employment. It runs programs that help young people understand where their futures might be. A number of health programs, helps military personnel re-engage with civilian life, and then the schools. And so it's a very diverse organisation that's grown over that period. Interestingly, probably one of the primary drivers for that diversification is another Welshman, a chap called Paul Miles, who happened to move to Australia, found Busy, realised that there was a prime opportunity in what they were doing to grow and to expand their reach, and diversified the charity even further. So our roots are an Australian charity working across those areas.
But it's fascinating how a charity in Australia could end up branching out to so many things, but also so many geographic locations. So when did Busy come to the UK?
So Busy came to the UK in 24. I was employee number 3 in January 2024. We'd actually come into the UK or established in the UK in the September or the October. And so we're reasonably new here. But as you say, our footprint now includes New Zealand, Canada, and also the UK.
Incredible. And soon to be Europe.
And soon to be Europe, quite. Absolutely.
So tell me a bit about your background then. We were talking off camera. You're a well-travelled man. You've got a very interesting CV.
It'd be entirely fair to call it a weird CV, I think is probably right. So I siarad Cymraeg. I went to Llanhari. So I'm a local boy, and went off to Birmingham to study biochemistry. I hope my father's not listening. I didn't find it particularly interesting. So transitioned from biochemistry to biochemical engineering, and did a postgrad in biochemical engineering in London. And again, didn't find that massively interesting either. So I joined the army in my spare time. I was a TA reservist. Probably picked one of the most active periods of the last 30 years to be a TA reservist, because I was mobilised to the war in Iraq. Worked in the Divisional Intelligence Cell in Iraq. And in a way, aside from the fact that it was war and unpleasant and difficult and all of those things, I probably found my métier around intelligence, problem solving, understanding how cultures and societies work together. So I gave up my life of biochemical engineering at that point, and after my tour in Iraq, stayed, worked on the reconstruction for about 18 months after, in a private capacity, and then went to Helmand. Left Iraq. Went to Afghanistan first. Worked in the British Embassy in Kabul for 3 years, and then worked in Helmand province for another 3 years. I think I was probably entitled to a passport by the time I left. While I was in Afghanistan, I found international development, and it was probably sort of the North Star of my career for about 15 years. It was working with UK government, US government, and Australian government programs around the world to deliver change. Be that change, societal change, be it economic change, or health change, and loved it. I worked with a number of companies. I've worked across the globe, met loads of really interesting people, and delivered huge numbers of quite interesting programs across the globe. And then towards the end of my career, I suppose, in international development, started thinking about how you could use some of the principles that we had developed around project management, around rapid mobilization, around thinking about ecosystems to solve problems, to come back into the UK. And I found a number of us were tasked with looking about how we would bring our existing company back into the UK. And we found the DWP employability programs. And we worked from the principle that if we could deliver skills programs in Bangladesh, or if we could deliver women's economic empowerment programs in northern Nigeria, then why couldn't we deliver employability programs in the UK? And so it proved. And actually, I discovered a world that I hadn't really noticed, and I don't think a lot of people really realize is there, around how an amazing industry helps people who have found it very difficult to stay in employment or to find employment indeed, to re-engage with the employment market. And I found some of the most passionate people I think I've ever found in my career sitting behind desks in Southampton or Winchester and helping people who have found it very, very difficult to sustain in work to move into work. And I confess it caught me by surprise. It caught me by surprise when you start finding, people who will work so hard to bridge people into employment. And I loved it. It was absolutely incredible. A huge opportunity for me to almost have I wouldn't say a second lease of life, but certainly a second career. And so I did that for probably about 2 years, and then I found Busy. Well, Busy came and found me, thankfully. And it was a wander around Roath Park Lake with Paul, where I decided that it was time to make a shift to another organisation, particularly interested in working in the not-for-profit sector. I sometimes find that, and it's probably an unfair view in some ways, but delivering, when you're thinking about your laser focus on the beneficiary, the person you're trying to help, and when you're delivering programs, but in the back of your mind, you're also thinking profit margin, can sometimes feel like a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde moment. Whereas I found in the charity sector, I can still think commercially. How do you be most efficient? How do you make sure that the money that you're deploying is deployed in the most effective way? But I don't necessarily have to think about a profit margin element. And so that's why I joined Busy, and I've loved it 2.5 years later.
It's fascinating. And I wonder what it is about I guess it's humanitarian work, really, that you were doing in a lot of ways. What about that really, really stuck with you? Was it just the case of feeling like you were doing right amongst the people you were helping?
I think, I was a failed medic at A-level. I'd always had a thing about wanting to try and, it sounds slightly naff, I suppose, wanted to help people. I've always been very focused on, both my parents worked in the NHS, and I've always felt quite strongly that, if you can, you should help people. You should think in that way. I'm not sure whether that drove me into the humanitarian world, but it certainly was that desire to be a decent human being, to try and leave a decent footprint is very much part of my psychology, I suspect. And I think that probably moved me in that direction. But equally, the work's fascinating. some of these problems are the knottiest problems you're going to you're going to find. And I think there's probably part of me that likes also the academic stretch of trying to think about, okay, how can we think about this differently? How can we solve these problems differently?
Sinclair Group has been part of the motor industry for over 80 years. That's not just a number, it's generations of trust built on shared values, because family isn't just who you're born to, it's who you choose to stand with, and that's what matters to us. We offer new and approved used vehicle sales and service for some of the world's biggest motor brands, and trust, that's at the heart of it all. So whether you're starting your journey or continuing a legacy, visit sinclairgroup.co.uk. Belong for good.
I suppose a benefit is you get to see so much of the world, not necessarily from a travel perspective, but you get exposed to people from all walks of life in all sorts of situations.
I've loved it.
Yeah.
And you know, my wife used to laugh at me a bit, and you know, I'd come home and write, you know, Nia, I'm off to Nigeria next week, or I'm off to Papua New Guinea, and there was, you know, it wasn't so much the travel, or it was certainly sort of experiencing different parts of the world. You know, I still got mates in Pakistan and worked in northern Pakistan, places that people probably haven't seen. And there's undeniably there's a buzz, feels like the wrong word to use, but almost there's an excitement to that. But it's also the opportunity to spend time with other cultures, to meet different people, to work in a different way, to learn much more about myself. It's been incredibly powerful.
And I suppose there are universal truths as well. No matter where you go, you'll always find people with a shared ethos, I suppose. And
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
So moving on and bringing things closer to home.
Sure.
Obviously, we talked at the top of the programme about the NEET population in Wales. I'm keen to know what you were like in school, considering that's your mission now, to get more people back into some form of education or employment.
It's a funny other thing, you know, by any stretch, I think I'd probably been considered a high achiever. You know, I wanted to go off and do medicine. I did the sciences at A level. But I don't think I ever. So I didn't get the A level grades I wanted. I didn't get the GCSE grades I wanted. I worked very hard, and I wonder whether. And so, you know, outwardly, I would have probably been described as a pretty decent student. I think the interesting thing for me was, and this reflects quite a lot to some of the conversations we're having at the moment, that sense of desperation as you're approaching your GCSEs and you think the world's about to end if you don't get the grades that you want. That feeling when I got 3 C's at A level initially, and that I wasn't going to get to go and do medicine, and feeling that everything had come to an end at that point. And actually, when you chat to some of the young people that we do, you start realizing that they feel that. And unfortunately, some of our narrative around education nowadays can drive that feeling into people, that if you don't get your GCSEs, or you don't get your A levels, or you don't go to your university, you failed in some way. So I think I would say, as a student, I probably outwardly appeared pretty happy and all of those things, but inwardly I was always worried that I was going to fail, and what did that mean, I think.
Yeah, my old head of sixth always used to say to us that these are the most important exams of your
100%.
life. And in a way they are. But I always remember it sending the fear of God into absolutely all of us. You know?
Absolutely. I always remember having a conversation with my mother, and you know, not to get the you know, the smallest violin in the world out now, but you know, sort of saying, oh well, if I don't get my GCSEs, what am I going to do? What does that mean? You know, and all of those things, and actually really, really worrying about it. And I'll admit, you know, the day I got my A level grades, it felt like the end of the world. I was just like, oh my God, you know, everything I've worked for has kind of gone out of the window. And I think that can be the voice, right? That can be what young people are hearing nowadays still. What
do you think that your younger self getting those A level grades would think of you now?
Wow, what an amazing career you've had the opportunity to have. You know, I literally have friends in every corner of the globe. I am hugely fortunate. I get to go back and forth to Australia. I get to work with amazing people. I've got to come home, and again find a whole load of other amazing people. I think, you know, they would be pretty happy with where I got to.
Not bad for feeling like the world was ending then.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So, I mean, let's talk about the root causes of why there's so many young people who are not in education, employment or training. It seems like a very simple question, and I imagine it's a very complicated answer. But why in Wales are we struggling with that statistic at the moment?
I think there's a whole load, there's a whole gamut of reasons, and, from, how our economy is at the moment, the opportunities for young people in more rural areas to find employment. I think there's a whole load of social economic reasons, but I think the one that we tend to laser in on at the moment is that education isn't necessarily working for a good proportion of the young people that are going through the system. We have, and it's probably an unfortunate term, but I use the term sausage factory. If you're a young person going into secondary school now, comprehensive or whatever, there is an expectation that you'll do well in your GCSEs. You'll then move on to A levels and you'll go to university. And you get a very real feeling that if that doesn't happen, if that isn't your pathway, there's potentially a feeling of failure. But also there's a bit of a gap between understanding what the other options are. I don't hear hugely colourful or interesting conversation around vocational qualifications. I don't necessarily get a feeling that there's a real understanding of the other alternative pathways for young people. And so I suspect that young people feel quite disengaged, or certain groups of young people feel quite disengaged if they don't fit into the cookie cutter mold, for want of a better term, of how you're going to move through the education pathway. I also feel the pressure in the school system. When I was in school, it wasn't unusual to have classrooms of 30. My understanding at the moment is we're seeing classrooms of in excess of 30 and 32, 33, 34, 35. And I worry that means that, if you're in the middle of the standard deviation in that classroom, you get attention. But if you happen to be towards the bottom end of the classroom, for whatever reason, or indeed towards the top end of the classroom, you might not get the attention. And please, please, please understand, I'm not criticizing teachers by any stretch. They have an absolutely incredible job to do under a huge amount of pressure. But there's the reality that if you fill a classroom with more young people, actually the ability to focus on individuals drops. And what that means in part is that people who really need more support might not get it. And if somebody is being disruptive or finding life difficult in that classroom, then it means that the vast majority of the classroom don't get it because the teacher's attention is taken away. And so we have a system at the moment that feels to me that is under a huge amount of pressure. We see, ALN, so alternative educational needs, for want of a better term, the levels of people who need extra support spiking, and schools are really poorly equipped to deal with it. And that means that there's a very real danger that if you're struggling, you won't get the focus that you need to succeed.
Why do you think that is, the spike in ALN needs? Is it just a case of where, as a society, we're a lot more in tune to things like the autism spectrum, ADHD?
I think probably. I think, diagnosis is better. I think parents are more aware of what could, if their child isn't necessarily succeeding, what could be causing that. But equally, I think it would probably be, I suspect that there's a habit of labelling at the moment, and I think people find themselves labelled quite quickly in certain ways, and potentially that means that you've got an extra proportion of people in the system that are defined in a certain way. But broadly, I think there is a greater understanding, a desire to, what's the word I'm looking for, diagnose more quickly and understand young people. And so I suspect that we're finding more people now than we've ever found before.
And absolutely, if there's a rush to get a diagnosis, then it could indeed be incorrect. Or for that matter, I guess what I'm trying to say is no two people with the same additional needs are necessarily going to have exactly the same difficulties.
I think that's fair. Yeah. I think that's fair. And when you've got large classrooms full of young people, I would argue that you're going to find it harder and harder and harder to nuance your delivery, your teaching to more and more diverse groups of people sat in front of you. And that's what we're asking of teachers at the moment. We're asking them to be almost subject matter experts across a spectrum of different conditions and to teach in a different way to all of them.
Sinclair Group has been part of the motor industry for over 80 years. And in that time, we've learned it's not just about cars, it's about the impact we leave behind. We believe in driving change, supporting the people around us where we live and work. Because when our communities thrive, we all do. We offer new and approved used vehicle sales and service for some of the world's biggest motor brands. But what drives us goes far beyond the road. So whether you're starting your journey or continuing your legacy, visit sinclairgroup.co.uk. Belong for good.
So tell me a bit about what Busy Group does differently then.
So the reality is, the busy schools were built, the guiding sort of definition of a busy school in Australia initially was find young people who have disengaged from mainstream education, who are struggling to sustain, for whatever reason, in mainstream education. Find why they've disengaged and bring small classroom size, trauma-informed approaches, and help these young people understand employment. And very much understand what the next step could be and how their lives could be, their pathway, I suppose, to a more sustainable future. And when you go to a busy school in Australia, you find young people who have a very clear view of where they can go next, right? And these young people have been removed or have left mainstream education, and dare I say it, probably were in danger of finding themselves almost on the rubbish heap in terms of where to go next. And actually what a busy school does is, it's as simple as looking at the individual in front of you, understanding their specific barriers and helping them to bridge to the next thing. So you don't hear lots of narrative around, academic qualifications. What you hear is an ability to expose young people to the work that sits around their communities or the opportunities that might be available to them where they come from, and an assistance in helping them bridge the gap to that future. And there's something transformational about helping a young person to understand how they can bridge to something, having been told their entire lives that they're not going to amount to anything or they're not going to succeed as far as school is concerned. And look, as far as Busy Australia is concerned, they have sustainment rates over a 2-year course of exceeding 80%, and 84% of those young people go directly either into jobs, into further education or higher education. Now in the UK, we've had to adapt our approach slightly. We were amazingly fortunate to find Cardiff City Football Club Foundation, and they were already taking young people into provision in the House of Sport in Cardiff. And what they were looking for was an education partner that could help bring our component of vocational qualifications and support and trauma-informed support into the classroom. And so we've started to build provision in Cardiff using exactly that model. We feel that sport is an incredible hook for young people. Being part of a team, being part of something, and honestly, almost going to school without actually going to school. They don't actually feel that they're going to school. They're going to do something really interesting, really cool with Cardiff City. And the education almost feels additional. It's something that I don't want to say they don't realise it's happening to them, because that's clearly not the case. But actually, it's not a classroom. They're not being shuffled around a school. What they are is they're spending time at Cardiff City Football Club. Effectively, they have a uniform that says that that's the case. And what we're finding is incredible engagement. And to me, look, I loved sport as a kid. I found it incredibly powerful. Being part of a team, understanding shared endeavour, and all of those things. And we see a real change in these young people because of it. Now, we've brought in a technology solution as well that helps these young people understand themselves from a different perspective. So they go through a whole load of gamified games. I've done them; they're terrifying, and they don't tell you who you are, but they give you a sense of these are your skills. This is you as an individual. So for a young person who's been told, you're not going to get your GCSEs or whatever else, right? Or you're naughty or all of those things. Imagine the breath of fresh air of being told, actually, you're a really good problem solver, or you think very differently around mathematics, or you really understand when you're talking to somebody what their facial expressions mean, right? And
God forbid I take one of those tests.
100%.
I really would not want to know.
And what you find is that the conversation changes, right? The conversation changes from one that says, no, you can't, to a conversation that says, yes, you can, and this is how we bridge you to it.
So you've referenced it a couple of times there about the journey that some of these children go on. delve into that a little bit more if you can. I know you couldn't, break any sort of confidentiality of speaking about individuals, but what are you seeing leaving the program compared to what comes in?
So look, to be very clear, our Cardiff provision started within the last. We started in October of last year, so it's quite difficult to give you a trajectory. I will come back to you in a second.
Of course.
On that, right? I'll give you two examples, and it's always better to talk in anecdotes, right? But before I joined Busy, I'd gone to visit a graduation. So the Busy School does all the things that normal schools do around graduations and all of this kind of stuff. And I was approached by, I was standing there minding my own business, being typically Welsh and coy and shy in the corner, and a colleague, a 4'0" mum, came storming towards me with a hulking Australian son behind her. He must have been about 6'3", he was massive. And she came up to me, and I had one of those moments where I thought I was about to be chest poked, and it was, "Are you management?" And I was like, "Well, no, I'm here." And she said, "I want to tell you about Busy School." I'm like, "Oh God, here we go." And she said he was trying to commit suicide, and I don't make light of the fact that he was doing that. It's more, she was so keen to tell me how desperate this young lad's life had been that she was willing just to blurt that out in a public moment. And she said he was in hospital, and a nurse had come and chatted and said he felt desperate. He didn't know where he was going to go. He was being removed from the school he was in. And she said, "Try Busy School." And the lad was going every day to Busy School. And I thought, my God, there's something here, and I just listened to these young people talking about their graduation. There was something about the fact, and what he talked about was teachers care about me. They know me. They understand me. They know that sometimes I'll have a breakdown because I can't do something and I'm getting frustrated and this kind of stuff. And they'll give me the time. They'll allow me to do that. They've also helped me to understand why I'm doing that and I can do it better. And I thought, that's stunning. And that young lad was going off then to go into a job locally. And then I went to another school where I was being shown around by two young women who I'd asked them both, why are you in a Busy School? And the one young girl had a very patchy education background from about 12, had been homeless for a period, had been involved with the police, and had basically come to a Busy School as the last choice. Was trying to do something else with her life. And she talked, and I said to her, you're coming to the end now, you're nearly finished, where are you going to go? And she said, well, me and my mate and the other girl, I'm not going to do an Australian accent because I'd rather take away from the story, but me and my mate, we're starting a plumbing company. I was like, really? And she said, we tried bricklaying, didn't like that. Tried being electricians, didn't like that. Tried being aircraft handlers at Gold Coast Airport, didn't really like that, but loved plumbing. And we are starting our own Sheila plumbing company because women around here are fed up of hairy-ass blokes ripping them off.
That's funny.
So we're going to go out there and do it. And I thought, well, that's amazing. And she was, she would have been 18. She had a laser focus on what her future was. She knew exactly what she was going to do. She'd had the opportunity to try a couple of different other things, a real opportunity to understand the working world in the area that she lived in. And she was heading off and absolutely certain about what she was going to do. And I just thought, yep, that's it. So what the school does, it lives in its own community. It understands very well the skills needs around it. It helps young people to understand, that's where a career choice could be, and experience those careers and then move on from that point. And those journeys are transformational.
And how do you feel, even telling that story is frankly a bit inspirational, to be honest, but when people are telling you about their experience and it is that transformational, does that make you feel?
So look, if my daughter was listening now, she'd probably cringe, but from a personal perspective, it's gut wrenching, right? There are moments where you kind of go, it's really emotional. I mean, there are videos available on YouTube of people talking about their stories, and I sat watching them with one of my colleagues on the management team last year, and it's a smoke in the room moment, because these young people are basically what they're describing, I suppose, and I don't want it to sound Disney because that's nonsense. They're describing desperation, a lack of hope, a lack of understanding where their futures were going to take them, and a feeling that essentially society had given up on them. And they're turning it around to say, I feel confident. I know where I'm going. I know I've got to work hard. I know I've got to do certain things, but I know that I can go in a direction now. And it is absolutely breathtaking.
Amazing.
Sinclair Group has been part of the motor industry for over 80 years, and we've never stood still. Because for us, it's not just about where we've been, it's about where we're going. We believe in progress, embracing innovation, investing in technology, and moving towards a more sustainable future for everyone. We offer new and approved used vehicle sales and service for some of the world's most forward-thinking motor brands. But our drive is always to the future. So whether you're starting your journey or continuing your legacy, visit sinclairgroup.co.uk. Belong for good.
And I'm sure that there'll be parents listening to this who are worried about their children, or know parents who are of children who aren't engaging with education at the minute. What's your advice for parents who are concerned about their children?
So by all means, reach out to us. You can reach out to us either via our website, so thebusygroup.co.uk, sorry, or you can reach out to the Cardiff City Football Club Foundation, and you'll find us there. I would strongly urge. There's a couple of things I think. Probably talk to your child. Try and it's very difficult to say some of these things without sounding quite trite. But talk to them, understand what it is that they're feeling, because I think probably, and it's not to criticise my parents, but if they'd said to me, "How do you feel about where you're going at the moment?" I would have probably given them a different view to the view that they probably had in their minds about where I was. But equally, look for the help, and if they really need some signposting, give us a shout and we'll try and signpost them in the right direction too.
Wonderful. Oh, absolutely. And it's been a fascinating conversation. Before we wrap up, though, we do obviously have to talk about the Women in Wales Awards, which, as we're recording, is happening a week today. You'll probably see this tomorrow, so in 6 days' time. We can't wait. It's absolutely. It's been months in the planning, and we're getting really close to the date now, so the excitement is really building. You decided to support the awards, for which, of course, we are extremely grateful. Just tell us why you wanted to get involved.
Look, I think it's critical to celebrate the achievements of women in Wales. And I think we are, I meet incredibly inspirational women pretty much every day as I'm working, either walking around my office in Case or when I'm out meeting people in the wider business world as far as Cardiff is concerned, South Wales and more broadly than that. I've always had really quite strong female mentors or female guidance as far as teams I've worked in the past, and I think it's important for us to be celebrating those things. I think it's an opportunity for us to celebrate women who are doing inspirational things across Wales, and also in reinforcing the importance of inclusivity and honestly anything that puts positive role models out there for young women to follow, for me is something critical for us to be supporting, and we're really proud to be part of the awards.
Absolutely. And we've been asking all the sponsors who are involved in the Women in Wales Awards, if you could pick just one. I know it may be very difficult, but an inspirational woman to you, whether that's in your personal life, your professional life, who would you like to highlight?
So look, I'm going to choose three, and I'm going to be cheeky, so forgive me. One, it would be meeting my wife changed me beyond all recognition, and I think Nia she'd cringe. But actually, everything I've done in my career has been facilitated by an incredibly strong woman at home who's been inspirational to me, and actually pretty much daily gives me pretty good advice as to how to face the world. Outside of that, I think, I was brought up at a time when Dame Tani Gray Thompson was winning medals for fun in the Olympics. I found that incredible, not least because she was physically challenged, but actually just that notion of trying to ride 26.2 or push a wheelchair 26.2 miles felt like an incredible feat to me. I found her inspirational as a sports person. I find her narrative around inclusivity and dignity incredibly powerful now, and I find her absolutely inspirational.
Mm-hmm.
And if I could finish on one, I said, our relationship with Cardiff City Football Club Foundation is incredibly important to us. Football has become much more important to me over the years. Jess Fitchlock, Welsh football player, incredible role model for young women. My own daughter, as an ex-rugby player, I might find this slightly awkward, I don't know, but wanted to play football. And part of that was following women like Jess Fitchlock and seeing the amazing example that they portray for young women.
Absolutely. Well, 3 perfect choices. Shout out to Nia, of course. Jess is an absolute living legend of the game, a force of which the game in Wales I don't think we'll probably ever see again. She is absolutely fantastic. And Tanni Gray, obviously, is such an inspirational woman, as you've already said. And, I mean, quite frankly, is working harder now, I think, than ever before. She's a very, very busy woman. And before we sign off, we ask all of our guests the same question right at the very end. And I've been dying to ask you this since the beginning, to be honest with you. But if there was any advice that you'd give to your younger self, and the reason I say I was excited to talk about it is because you deal with younger people all the time. If you had any advice for your younger self, what would that be?
That's some advice for my younger self.
It's always good to put you on the spot.
Whenever it's felt really dark, it's always been darker in my head than it's actually been in reality. And what I mean by that, I think, is, I remember that A-level moment really, really clearly and thinking, oh my God, I have no idea what I'm going to do now. And actually, 2 weeks later, there was another route. I'd found something else, and there was another way forward. And you kind of look back at it and think, I was so upset about that and so broken. And then you find another way. So I suppose my advice to my younger self would probably be along the lines of hang in there. It'll be all right. And there are amazing things around the corner. And I do say that with a mind to, if there's anybody listening who's finding it really hard, because there's a better time around the corner.
That's a lovely way to end it. Wonderful. Rhys, thank you so much for coming in. Also, thank you for the work you do and for supporting the Women in Wales Awards. It's been an absolute pleasure. Hopefully, we'll do it again soon.
Look forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. If you did like that conversation, please do like and subscribe. Follow Business in Wales on X, on Instagram, and, of course, on LinkedIn. But until next time, that's been the Business in Wales podcast. We'll see you soon. The Business in Wales podcast, sponsored by Sinclair Group, the business media for Wales.